Welcome to our Tenet review.
Hello.
We've got a new type of intro, and we're going to do that same
Don't like
intro.
it. I am not a fan.
For
Every time, every review will be, welcome to our Tenet review.
yeah, that's it. This is my curse in life. Wow, we've been just like milking this new cycle of Tenet for the past 6 months, and starting to get real tedious towards the end there. But we have the film now. Can you believe it? Cinemas reopened in Australia. Guys, where were you guys sitting before Tenet? I know we've been talking about this at length, but where were you guys sitting before Tenet? And then let's get into the non-spoiler part of the review, and then later on we'll get into spoilers. Benny, why don't you kick us off, man?
Yes, so this is the first big release we've had here in a very long time.
Yeah.
So it was hard not to be a little bit excited about it. I go a little back and forth on Nolan. I think he's so very impressive in so many ways in everything he's done, but several of his movies have left me kind of cold. In particular, his last few, Dunkirk, I thought at least was an amazing achievement technically, and amazing to watch, but not something I'm ever going to go back to.
Yep.
And Interstellar and The Dark Knight Rises, I'm just not even going to bother. But yeah, this looked cool. This really looked like a spiritual successor to Inception, which I think is one of his better ones.
Yep.
I think everyone can kind of agree on that. And it looked very like it was leaning very hard into like the there is a puzzle to be unraveled here, and I was pretty keen to jump into that.
Oh yeah, Connor.
I've always thought that watching a Nolan film is like watching a beautiful game of chess, which, you know, you can wax poetry about chess if you really want to, but at the end of the day, it's pretty clinical.
Yeah.
And I think you have to appreciate the mastery and the complexity and the kind of beauty of that game. But it's certainly not what you would call, you know, warm.
Yeah.
To your point, Ben.
Mm.
So, and you know, I guess in that sense, I know what I'm getting into with a Nolan film.
Yep.
And I'm not usually upset by that. I think that Inception, which is probably what I would have most related this film to, before watching it and probably after it, I suppose, I think one of my favorite films of all time. It's probably in my top 10 films. Because I think it is just on so many levels an excellent film.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was going into this quite excited, very aware of the hype that Nolan gets, and that he drums up in time. So trying to kind of
And
like
the potential coming war between audiences and fanboys.
yeah. And so I try to kind of like, you know, set my expectations reasonably, I suppose, going into these kind of films. But yeah, that's kind of where I was coming at. I don't think anything I could have done would have prepared me for this film, really.
Maybe a physics degree.
I was going to say like a master's in theoretical physics and philosophy.
Georgie, you watched Inception very recently.
Yeah. And I had a great time, but I think to your point, I came out of Inception feeling a little bit cold, and I was kind of expecting to feel similar with Tenet in a way. Sort of, I was going to be technically awestruck, and there was going to be stuff to talk about, and I'd have to go do a little bit of research afterwards. But would I necessarily, you know, get that sort of gut punch? What was that film we saw earlier for Movie Book Club, like Tangerine or something, you know, like get that sort of emotional, like arrested feeling. And that's just not something that I necessarily get from Nolan. So again, it's kind of like, you know what you're going in for. So I kind of knew, non-spoilers, it's going to be tough.
Wow. Well, so can we, first of all,
Stick to the easy stuff.
Stick to the easy stuff. And can we just comment on the complexity of the plot, or not even just the plot, the complexity of the mechanics? And we don't have to get into the specifics. I think that,
or can we
in fact, we should avoid that entirely.
Can we even start somewhere even more simple? Like, I'm happy to go down that path if you want, but even more simple, I think we can all, maybe you guys will disagree with me, but I think we can all agree on, visually, this film is just breathtaking. Like,
yeah.
I mean, like,
we can
it's
talk
not
about the
like
visuals
the
first.
sort of this typical Michael Bay vistas with, like there's a lot of there's sort of like industrial browns and whites and stark military complexes, but it has a vibe, and it looks so incredible.
And it feels very large scale in areas, combined with the just insane amount of like bass in the soundtrack. It's quite epic.
Yeah. So I think that those are two aspects of this that I think are kind of flawless, in that the look of the film, like so the cinematography, the
Hoyte van Hoytema.
Hoity van Hoity.
all that is pretty spectacular. And I'm not even going to try and pronounce the guy's
Ludwig
name.
Göransson.
Ludwig Göransson.
You said you weren't going to try.
Yeah, well,
Leave it to me.
His soundtrack, I thought, was pretty spectacular.
Unoriginal though. Unoriginal.
That was literally what I was about to say. It does kind of make you think that he just went to Zimmer's best hits and kind of tweaked them slightly, which I did find a bit disappointing.
I feel like Nolan has maybe given him a bit too much heavy-handed direction in the Zimmer. Well, listen, who knows what that relationship and how that transcended, but to me, if you told me Hans Zimmer did this, I would have believed you, and for me is not a good sign for, I guess, what I wanted out of this. And I wanted something that maybe different.
You would have believed it, and you also would have gone, his Inception stuff was better.
Yeah.
Yeah. It
We had the
feels like a
drums.
redux of...
We had a lot of the same stuff. There was one point where they're going on the boats. I don't think that's a spoiler. And there was something synthy in there.
Yes.
Which was quite cool.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it was a bit more melodic, and it stood out.
I wanted more of that. I wanted more of that.
And I gotta say, look, it's really effective in a Nolan film, because he, across all his films, you get that tick-tock kind of
the cross-cutting
metronome,
big moments, loud noises.
Yeah, and that's very much his style. Which is fine, but it just, I guess it makes it feel, I guess in more ways than one, as this kind of like companion piece to Inception, because the trailer is so similar. I mean, as a bit of a side note, the world feels like it belongs in the world of Inception. Like if they found, and I think this would be fucking cool, but if they found a way to combine those two movies, not by plots, not bringing any of the same characters, but just by combining those films in terms of the mechanics and the world that they live in, that would be fucking cool.
They've got the same sort of stripped back. It's not like all dials and crazy CG.
It just feels like
LEDs. Like it's very non-techy.
And like every Nolan film, it's important men doing important things wearing very nice suits.
Yeah.
Which I'm always, it's a certain aesthetic. I like that aesthetic.
Yeah.
It always makes me think that he'd do a great Bond film.
Yeah. Can we talk about that?
Can we jump on that? Yeah, because
I think
this is a Bond film.
the men in the suits and the Bond film thing was kind of one of my complaints about this film.
Really?
Is the fact that, and we'll talk about this in spoilers, it adheres to the spy genre convention so heavily that it actually gets ridiculous in some parts for me.
Okay.
It pulled me out of the movie in some parts. And I just thought, like, okay, yeah, Nolan, like, we're getting Nolan's Bond. It is different from Inception in that, I don't know, it felt... somehow it felt different. It felt more spy-esque. It was less espionage thriller and it was more like spy Bond kind of thriller. And I don't know if maybe those are the same thing. Maybe I'm getting fucking confused here. But
Inception
there was
a
something
heist
distinct.
film.
Yeah,
whereas
okay.
this one is definitely a spy espionage film.
Cool. Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Yeah,
then.
and so there's and I think that's fine to have a distinction between the two. I mean, I would hope that there is. But whereas, Inception wasn't particularly revolutionary in terms of in terms of the heist genre. They did the whole let's assemble the crew and train the crew and do the plan, and the plan doesn't work, and that's very kind of hit by hit. With this one, I think that it didn't do anything outside the normal in terms of the general hits, and that brings me to another point, which is that. And I was actually going to take this the other way. I was going to talk about the complexity and then strip it back, but let's kind of start from the ground up. This movie from a plot point is really basic and not that inventive. From a very basic, give me the highlights of what this movie is, it's almost bordering on cheesy.
Okay, I will actually say I'm completely the opposite of you, where I found this film, especially in some of the dialogue mixing, really difficult to understand. But
Yeah.
in the same token, I got what was going on, but to the point where the minuscule details of like this is happening, then this is happening, this is happening, and I'm trying to understand this whole thing that's going on. I didn't understand this film completely, but I didn't actually give enough of a crap to want to really invest and get that extra layer of detail. Like I was like, hey, this is cool. Cool. But I don't necessarily feel like that same feeling when I came out of Inception, where I needed to figure this beast out.
Yeah. So, I mean, here, I'll give you, with this one, what I feel as though happened is like if you take the mechanics out of it, take the time and all that kind of stuff out of it, they did not spend an awful lot of time figuring out, let's say character arcs or plot or anything like that.
It's quite a lot of plot. I'd say
let me finish
okay,
that.
yeah.
Then. What they did after that is they added this mechanic and this kind of way of storytelling that jumbles it all up. And so it's like being given a Rubik's Cube. And when you finish the Rubik's Cube, it's nothing special, but it's figuring out what or how to decode it that is so interesting about it. It's immensely complex, and some people will just never figure it out, and so it'll remain this kind of elusive or kind of impressive piece. But once you figure it out, it's kind of like, and not to say that I have figured it out, but I get the impression that like the basic bones of this are not that complex.
But that's I don't think you're wrong at all. But I think the joy in the movie is the figuring it out and the experiencing as it's happening. Like, nobody enjoys a solved Rubik's Cube, but solving Rubik's Cubes is one of the biggest pastimes in the world. I wouldn't say this movie is like, so I wouldn't say it's like too basic on a plot or character level. I think keeping it as simple as it is in that area is crucial for allowing the rest of the movie to spin around it like a Swiss watch.
Yeah.
And I think that's so on brand.
I'm not even saying it's a bad thing, right? I'm just kind of describing it as if look,
that's
an
observation. Yeah.
And then like and the only thing that I would say was negative off that is that when you look at perhaps some of the character development, it doesn't really feel as though there's some characters that don't quite feel as well-rounded as maybe they should have been, or you don't feel like the character arcs are there.
And this isn't at all a mitigating factor, but it's very on brand for Nolan.
Oh yeah.
Like this is just very typical Nolan in all of its intrigue.
If we're looking at the Martin Scorsese approach, where plot is what happens to the characters and story is what they experience, like this this is so heavy on plot and very not heavy on story. There's an interaction that happens later on in the film between two characters. I honestly felt zilch.
Yeah.
I felt absolutely zilch, and that's okay. But I'm starting to, as a film goer, as a movie experience person, like that thing was working well in 2010, after The Dark Knight, the hype, but does it work in 2020? I just don't know if Nolan is bringing enough to the table in other areas and pushing himself as a filmmaker to me be really satisfied with this thing. And I think Tenet might be one of the most sort of I don't think I'm going to experience Tenet many times compared to some of his other films.
I plan on watching this. Up front, I've only watched it once, and I've been thinking about it constantly.
See, I haven't. And I think that's a problem.
Yeah, maybe. And I'm absolutely like I think there's enough stylistic substance there that I will enjoy watching it again just for its beauty. And I think that there's enough to kind of work around in terms of the mechanics that I'll enjoy watching this again just to kind of figure it out. But to kind of take it back to, and this kind of ties into what you were saying about the different styles or the different ways of telling these stories. I would compare this to a Rubik's Cube, as I said before, because it is very like methodical. And then the end result is kind of like, this is how it should be. And you're like, cool, I finished the Rubik's Cube.
Yeah.
As opposed to something like, for example, Shutter Island, which I'd be like trying to decode a painting, which it doesn't matter how many times you analyze the painting. Doesn't matter, you can go into the different types of paint used. You can use it you can do all of that, but there's no kind of answer to it. There's no like, I finished the Rubik's Cube for that.
Yes.
And I think that that's a very different way of approaching a film, and I really enjoy that film.
Yes.
But I also like Rubik's Cube.
And I think that's like, if I'm again to compare two very different films, Tangerine to this, Tangerine, like, I get this emotional arrested feeling to it. And obviously these are completely different films, completely different genres. But, I was thinking about that film for a long time. And I'm not thinking about this film. And at the end of the day, I start to think to myself, very similar to you, he went here, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then boom. And when all ends up in a nice little bow, but did my heartstrings get pulled on? Did I feel something about humanity? Did I feel something? Do you know what I mean? Like, and then something like Tangerine, I feel the human experience. I feel something. So like, I think the puzzle box, that is a very good analogy, because at the end of the day, this film has that very sort of zeros and ones grid-like aspect to it, but it doesn't have the heart. It doesn't have the heart to it.
Does that?
Which is like, it's just like,
would you kind of say that it is lesser because of that then?
Very much so.
Okay.
Very much so. And I would say, like, for me, as a film going experience for Nolan, I'm kind of generally on this guy's side, even Interstellar. But like over time, I'm kind of like, Interstellar. Dunkirk. How many times have I seen Dunkirk? How many times have I seen Dark Knight Rises? This decade hasn't been, for me, the most favorable to Nolan. And this seems to kind of continue the trend. Not to say that this film doesn't do some amazing shit. And I think visually it's just outstanding. But you know what? A major issue I have with this, and maybe this is me as an audio engineer, sound guy, but as somebody who is like working right now to put out product into a market, I think him as a filmmaker putting that kind of, the ADR work, or the lack thereof of ADR work on this, I think is really bad. I think really, in a film this complex, I shouldn't be thinking to myself, I wish this had subtitles on right now.
Yeah, so I am actually working as a projectionist on this film at the moment. We're running it in 70mm film, which is fantastic how it looks.
Amazing.
But Nolan's sound mixing is always so interesting, because he's such an exposition-heavy director.
He sucks.
And I find there were many moments in this film that I found it very hard to understand what they were talking about, which definitely didn't detract as much from the film as it did for you. But it's definitely not something you want to have to deal with, especially when you're dealing with a movie with a complex plot. This is
not the movie where you want to miss dialogue, because there's so much that is going on with this film that like, God, just missing even half a sentence. Like there were moments in this film where my fiance was like, all right, explain where the fuck we are right now.
Yeah.
I'm so lost. And
you're like, I'm trying to listen.
Yeah, that's literally what I was doing. I was like, I don't want to take my eyes or my attention off the screen for even a split second, because I know as soon as I do, I'm going to be so lost. So I was doing these kind of like half like, so the dude is trying to do the thing and just go with it. Like just, I was barely understanding this myself.
Yeah.
And to have that added on to the fact that like sometimes it was just difficult to hear what characters were saying, that's tough. Now, part of that is because of the mechanics of the film. Like there's just no other way to do it, I think. But yeah, it's wild. Your cats are going fucking nuts.
For me, like this particular, there's an opening scene where there's an exchange between two characters. I'm like, he's using the on-set dialogue here. He is refusing to use ADR. And I think that's Nolan's biggest problem. And at this stage in his career, he's earned too much money at the box office for people to give him notes like that now. He goes, I'm doing it my way. This is my creative thing. Hey, Warner Brothers says, hey, listen, you need to add a Travis Scott song on the end. All right, fuck, we'll add a Travis Scott song in the credits because of COVID and whatever. But, other than that, So for me, it's like one of those great dilemmas with any creator, with anyone who becomes amazingly successful, is they don't the influence or the team or the people that maybe help them along the way, or their receptiveness to some creative ideas that could maybe help it. I don't necessarily know if Nolan is fully receptive to those ideas. And I think at the end of the day, you get a product. If put it this way, if I showed you, let's say I went out there and made Tenet and I showed you guys and you said, yo, I love the movie, but like, I just heaps of shit I couldn't understand. I would try.
Smash your computer on the ground and jump over the balcony.
I would jump off the balcony and say I had a good run.
I'm always conflicted by that, right? Because I'm like, there's often times where you have ADR that is quote unquote good because you can hear it clearly, but it also feels like I shouldn't be able to hear
too
that
clinical.
clearly. Yeah, and I'm like that, and which it also kind of feels weird that that's not in Nolan's wheelhouse. Like you would feel as though he would want everything clean and crisp, and that's just kind of his.
But he does have so much handheld. Like you look at the work, it's very handheld. It's so. I mean, that's one of my biggest complaints. I think as just a piece of content. Like I want my audience to understand the information being put across here.
Especially with this film.
I understand like the notion of using the microphone on set. Like that's a cool idea. Great. But at the end of the day, we're working with a $200-300 million movie here. Like, I don't know, that grandma gears, man.
Yeah.
I got to jump in here because my big point of difference here is I've seen the movie twice.
Yes.
Which I think is astronomical.
Wow.
It would be. I can't even imagine.
I gotta say, because I watched it the first time and I was like hanging on every word or trying to really, really analyzing it. It was trying to figure out what was going. And I'm not great at that generally during films.
Yep.
But I was giving it a go, and I feel like I came out of it kind of half understanding it. And watching it the second time was night and day. I was able to know what everyone was talking about from the first scene.
Cool.
And be able to put it all together as it was going, which is so much easier than getting to the end of the movie and having all the pieces and being like, all right, I got to make a fucking Jenga tower now.
Yeah.
Like as it was kind of going and I was able to do it in real time, I'm like understanding this really well. I feel like I'm at like 3/4 now after watching it.
Yeah, cool.
It literally was. There was entire scenes where I'm like, I just let them go. Because I was like, I'll understand this on the second pass.
Well, there's major things in the character
way.
that we'll talk about later that they're just talking about for ages, and then they don't show up until much later in the film. And you don't even know context for what's they're even on about. But I think, and maybe it's unfair to like I don't want to say you can't judge this film having only seen it once, but they literally offered to screen it multiple times for critics so they could properly review the film.
Yeah.
And I would not feel comfortable talking about this movie only having seen it once.
Yeah.
I think you guys are unprofessional and you should leave and let me just talk for a while.
I completely agree. But you know what? The biggest thing that's niggling at me is the fact that I'm not desperate to go out and go see this and figure it out.
So the opposite.
I honestly, I couldn't give two fucks.
That's wild.
Like
I went
the
to-
building, sorry, let's not get into that.
I went to watch this like 8 hours after I had finished watching it again.
I mean, you watched Endgame 3 times in a day, so
Yeah. And that movie sucks.
Like, that fucking ended it for you, didn't it? If you'd seen Endgame once that day, you would love that movie still, but you just sucked every juice out of that.
I don't know.
Yeah, so that's what I'm getting at here. That's my main problem is why am I not feeling like dude, when you go see it again, you're gonna feel like and we'll get into it in spoilers, but there's character moments here that's just...
Yeah, no, and as I said, the character development and the characters in general don't feel very central to what this movie's about. Like, and that's certainly something that I would say is a major point of departure from something like Inception, where, contrary to what you said last time, I do think that there is a lot of heart behind a lot of these characters. Like, you do feel the plight of a bunch of these characters.
Yeah.
Whereas in this one, they're just moving pieces.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I don't even know where you would fit more character development in, if I'm honest. This movie is so like, there's not a wasted second in this movie. No, I don't, not that I can think of at least. So much of it is spent explaining stuff and like, with kind of the mechanics, and you're just like,
It's like half of the movie. This is a 2.5 hour movie. It's like half the movie is just exposition to get you ready for the back half of the movie.
Yeah. And I still didn't understand, or I understood things, but things were happening too quick for me to really process like what was happening.
Yeah.
Which is again why I want to see it again. I'm really keen on that.
Great performances across the board from all the actors.
Yeah, there were
John
so many
David
moments where I was
Washington
like,
was cool.
why am I hearing Denzel but not seeing Denzel?
Yeah.
There's also like there are some I would say
Help! We're under attack.
there certainly are some performances that I thought were absolutely stellar.
Yeah.
You know, above and beyond everyone else.
Robert Pattinson is
Robert
fantastic in this film.
Pattinson, Kenneth Branagh, I really enjoyed, and
Really?
I can't remember her name.
I don't know about I
the
don't know.
woman in this.
Debicki? I don't know, man.
Elizabeth
I think Nolan.
Debicki.
I'm not sure about Branagh's
Are
character.
you talking about Branagh? The character or his? I'm talking about his performance.
I thought his accent was kind of ropey. I don't know. Like, we'll talk about. I think that's
Yeah,
one
sure,
for more.
sure. I thought he was really good. There were certainly a couple of scenes
Serviceable,
where I thought
serviceable. I would say.
his acting came out quite well.
I think
I'm always a fan
Pattinson, John David Washington. I think we're all in agreement. They were fantastic.
See, I mean, I would have put Branagh above David Washington.
I can't.
I mean,
John David on round 2, I was like, fuck, I love this guy now.
yeah.
Yeah.
And that, all right. No one did a bad performance in this. Let me be very
Except
clear.
that one guy. We all know who. We won't say it's a spoiler.
Yeah, it's fair. But yeah, I think out of anyone, like that was I thought that Branagh and again can't remember her name.
Elizabeth Debicki.
Debicki.
Yeah. One of the worst female characters ever written, ever put to screen.
Wow.
I
What?
think
What?
We'll have to get into this. That's
Terrible.
interesting.
All right, yeah.
Nolan cannot write female characters to save his fucking days, man. Like,
That's interesting.
It's and maybe that was another element of this film, like guys in suits doing shit, important shit. Like, I got the same thing in Inception, like corporate espionage, guys in suits doing important shit. There was a part of me that's kind of like, I'm just a little bit unengaged with this.
And especially in Inception, it was very much like, but a woman keeps getting in the way. I thought this movie was kind of more of an attempt to address his issues with female characters.
Ooh, let's talk about that. I just think he has no grasp on it.
Should we do a little wrap up on it then?
Yeah. I think ultimately this is. I mean, knowing what Nolan is good at, what he's done previously, I think this is kind of on the money for him, right? It's cold, it's calculated, it's complex. It deals with time. It's got a dope soundtrack. I think that if you go in, you're kind of expecting a Nolan piece, you're gonna be coming out of it relatively happy. And I've got to say that's kind of where I landed on it. It was immensely confusing. I'm really keen to go back and watch it again. But yeah, that's kind of where I'm sitting at it.
I found this movie to be very complex. I was really struggling to keep up with it on my first time, but not in a way that ever frustrated me. I was very excited to see where it was going and if it would be able to put it all together at the end. And for me, it did. And then I watched it again. And honestly, the second viewing, I really liked the first time. The second viewing was so much better. I just think this is a staggering achievement. I don't know how you would write this film, let alone shoot it. As we'll talk about in spoilers, the way this thing is put together, and this is Nolan, so there's like no visual effects in this film. I was just like, how
It's
ridiculous.
It is genuinely shocking that he was able, like, his room must look like just this web of like strings attached to strings.
Crazy person serial killer's room. I can't wait to watch this a few more times in cinemas and report back again.
Yeah, keen.
Yeah, this is in terms of a technical achievement, this is outstanding. The mechanics, everything in there it's so well thought out. It's so well put together. It's so meticulous. The visuals, it's all as a product. It's just fantastic. It's lacking the edge. It's lacking the heart. It's just not hitting me on kind of things that I want movies to hit me in.
And it's
these
thoroughly
days.
unconcerned if the audience gets it or not.
Oh yeah, it does not give two
more
fucks.
so than like so much. Like Inception is like the stereotypical like people don't get this movie, and the movie doesn't care that people don't get it. This is so much more so.
Yeah. Like, I mean, for a movie that spends so much time in exposition, it doesn't stop to explain what's going on at all. Like from a plot level, like all the exposition is about like kind of like mechanics and general like high level stuff. There's nothing about like who are you people and why are you doing what you're doing? Like that is all assumed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's wild.
and that's maybe probably my biggest complaint is sort of
Really?
like, hey, Nolan, like, I know you like these sort of really technical big things, but I just don't give a fuck, bro. Like, let's
I
make,
kind of, I like that. I kind of like
Yeah.
that there's a movie
Well,
out
that's
there
the cynical side of me, you
yeah.
know?
I like that there's a movie out there that's kind of like, I don't have time to explain everything. Watch this a couple of times. You'll figure it out. You'll be
It's
fine.
like you wake up on a battlefield and this older experienced guy grabs you and is like, we're going. It's like,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh my God. That is like the perfect explanation about
Yeah.
how I felt watching this the first time. Just being like, so kind of like, I don't have time to explain.
Yeah.
This is what's happening. You'll figure it out on the way. And I'm like, cool, let's do this.
Yeah.
I kind of dig that.